There exists a profession unlike any other, one where a person can change into any job they wish. That profession is called the job changer. And this is the story of Tsukasa Amashiki's unexpected career advancement in another world. Before being transported elsewhere, Tsukasa had been a man consumed by ambition. He was determined to build a shining career, deliberately applying to a prestigious company to prove his worth. In truth, he had always been a job hopper, moving from one company to another. But for Tsukasa, switching jobs wasn't a sign of instability. It was how he honed his skills. Staying in one place too long would only make him stagnant, he believed. That's why he had set his sights on a top-tier corporation this time. After passing through numerous evaluations, he reached the final interview with his trademark salesman smile. The screening process had been brutally difficult, but he pushed through with relentless determination. Now, standing outside the interview room, he steadied his breathing, ready to face one last challenge. The receptionist gestured for him to enter. Straightening his posture, Tsukasa smiled confidently. He'd handled all kinds of difficulties before. Whatever awaited him beyond that door would be no different. But when he opened it, instead of a conference room, he found himself staring at a vast, empty meadow. At first, he thought he had entered the wrong room by mistake, but when he turned around, the door was gone. His confidence faltered. He tried to stay calm, but panic quickly set in. Where was he? And more importantly, what about his final interview? When he touched his face, it felt smoother. The wrinkles were gone. He pulled out his phone and froze. The reflection staring back at him was his 18-year-old self. For a moment, his ambition took over. With this much experience at such a young age, any company would want him. But then reality hit. This is not the time to thinking that. This wasn't Japan anymore. Or was it even Earth? All around him stretched an endless field of grass. The only sign of life was a strange berry bush ahead. Curious, he reached out, and the berries suddenly morphed into tiny, fur-covered creatures with fluttering wings. Tsukasa jumped back in shock. That was the moment he realized it. He had truly been transported to another world, like something straight out of the games and anime he used to watch, he thought. Checking his pocket, he found a golden card engraved with his name and some kind of status. When he said menu aloud, a glowing screen appeared before his eyes, just like in the isekai stories he'd seen. Reading carefully, Tsukasa discovered his current stats and power level. His mana power is pretty awesome, and his listed profession was job changer. When he tapped on it, an enormous list of possible jobs unfolded before him. Each change required a certain amount of mana. For now, he was only a level 1 swordsman. It almost felt fitting. A profession made just for him, someone who'd changed careers countless times before, from salesman to field supervisor. But questions remained. Why had his interview room become a gateway to another world? Would someone else appear here too? Maybe another candidate? Or a guide? He shook the thought away. If he ran out of water, he'd die. Waiting around was not an option. Being passive wasn't his style. Tsukasa lived by one rule: stay positive and everything will work out. He took his first few steps forward. Then, the ground trembled. In front of him stood a massive insect-like monster, a mantis, larger than a car, covered in spikes, its wings stirring up fierce gusts of wind. The mantis locked eyes with him. For a moment, they stared at each other. Then it lunged. Tsukasa bolted, running faster than he ever had in his life. His optimism vanished the instant reality sank in. A monster. Already great. He ran until his lungs burned, but he knew he couldn't keep running forever. Cornered against a tree, he turned around. The mantis paused, confused for an instant. Tsukasa raised his hands, shouting that he wanted to talk it out, but the creature swung its bladed arms, slicing the tree clean in half. He fell back, trembling, realizing that if it had swung just a little closer, his head would be gone. This thing wasn't going to negotiate. They stood face to face now, predator and prey. His heart pounded as he racked his brain for a solution. Then he remembered. His job power. Fumbling through his pockets, Tsukasa pulled out his golden card and yelled to change his job to sorcerer. A blinding light erupted. For a brief moment, it felt as if time had stopped and the world existed only for him. Knowledge, arcane and ancient, surged into his mind. When the glow faded, instinct took over. He raised his palm and conjured his fireball's first spell. A swirling flame formed in his hand, growing hotter and denser until it shot forward like a bullet. The explosion engulfed the mantis, burning it to ashes in seconds. Tsukasa stared in disbelief as the creature vanished, leaving only smoke behind. He clenched his fist, a shaky grin spreading across his face. He had survived in his first battle. When Tsukasa opened his status window again, he saw that his level had risen to 2, exactly like in a game. But then he looked at the scorched earth where the mantis had died. The air still smelled of smoke. This wasn't a game. It was real. Painfully real. If he treated it lightly, he'd die for sure. Frustration welled up inside him. He had worked so hard to build a successful career, to land that dream job, to live a better life. But all those achievements only works on modern Japan. It all meant nothing in this world of monsters and magic. He sat down, feeling hopeless for a moment. But giving up wasn't in his nature. Tsukasa took a deep breath and made himself a promise. If this was his new world, then he would build his career from the ground up, again. After all, he had the ultimate advantage, the power of a job changer. He could be anything he wanted, swordsman, sorcerer, or something far beyond. This battle alone had shown him how crucial job power was here. If he mastered every profession, there'd be no limit to what he could achieve. Straightening his tie and brushing off the dust, the salaryman of another world smiled. In this land of swords and sorcery, he would become the master of all jobs. After finding a spot that felt relatively safe among the trees, Tsukasa decided to test out a water ball spell. With that, he no longer had to worry about finding clean water. He wanted to set up a campfire next, but the thought of attracting monsters made him hesitate. Being a practical man, he knew the basics of survival: food, clothing, and shelter. Since he already had water covered, the next step was finding a place to stay. Tsukasa opened his status window again, hoping one of his available jobs might prove useful. He used 20 mana points to change his job, then spent another 10 on Fireball. Thankfully, his mana recovered gradually thanks to the sorcerer's passive skill. Logically, there was no reason to be afraid of experimenting with new jobs. After scrolling through the long list for a while, he finally picked something that seemed handy: job as hunter. Immediately, his senses sharpened. The air around him felt clearer, his hearing more focused. He crouched down, sniffed the ground, and examined the grass carefully. Before long, he noticed something: faint human footprints pressed lightly into the dirt. Nearby, a few blood-stained leaves lay scattered, almost buried by the soil. Judging by how faded they were, the scene was at least 2 days old. There were also wolf tracks mixed in. A spark of hope lit up his face. If he followed these tracks, there was a good chance they would lead him to a village. He pushed through the tall weeds, sweat dripping down his neck from the heat and exhaustion. But when the trees finally opened up, he froze, eyes wide. In the distance, thin trails of cooking smoke rose lazily into the sky. It wasn't a city, more like a small countryside village, but that didn't matter. With a grin, he sprinted toward it. Since he didn't need to track anything anymore, Tsukasa switched his job back to sorcerer. When he reached the village gate, a man stood guard, holding a simple wooden spear. As the polite businessman he was, Tsukasa straightened his tie, smiled warmly, and greeted him. But the guard only stared suspiciously, asking who he was and why his clothes looked so strange. Without hesitation, Tsukasa introduced himself and explaining that he was a wandering sorcerer. The man, however, seemed doubtful. Job holders, he said, rarely came to remote places like this. That surprised Tsukasa. Was having a job that uncommon there? The guard then demanded proof. Of course it's his status card. Confidently, Tsukasa handed it over like a business card. Sure enough, sorcerer was written clearly beside his name. The man apologized immediately and explained that most job holders were employed by kingdoms or noble families, or they traveled to big cities to become adventurers. That's why they were rarely seen in remote villages. Tsukasa understood right away. It was just like the modern world. People always moved to larger cities for better opportunities. Smiling slyly, he wove a convincing story that he had been training his magic deep in the forest and now wished to enjoy a peaceful life in the countryside. He had arrived just that morning, still looking for a place to settle. The guard chuckled, finally relaxing. Then his expression grew serious. He said he had a favor to ask of someone like Tsukasa. He introduced himself as Zozo and led Tsukasa into the village. They walked to one of the tallest stilt houses, where Zozo eagerly opened the door and called out to the village chief. A middle-aged man with a thick mustache looked up in surprise. Hearing that a job holder had arrived, his eyes welled up with emotion. He trembled as he asked Zozo if it was true, not just false hope. Zozo confirmed he had already checked the status card. The chief, Esta, greeted Tsukasa warmly. As always, Tsukasa responded with a polite bow and presented his card again, a gesture of professionalism that had become second nature to him. Esta then explained the problem. A silver wolf had appeared near the village. Tsukasa immediately understood. The blood and tracks he'd seen earlier must have belonged to that creature. The villagers had managed to handle a few of them, but when a pack appeared, they were overwhelmed. Esta bowed his head and asked if Tsukasa could help them drive the monsters away. Zozo added that there were no other job holders in the entire village. That realization made Tsukasa pause. It seemed people like him were rarer than he thought, but rather than being intimidated, he saw opportunity. A grin tugged at his lips. There's always demand for combat-ready jobs, he thought. Curious, he asked what the silver wolf was like. Delighted to have his interest, Zozo eagerly explained. It was a fast, silver-furred beast with razor-sharp fangs and claws, known for its incredible sense of smell. The Adventurers Guild ranked it as an E-class monster, only the second lowest tier, yet still dangerous enough to wound or kill ordinary villagers. Zozo's tone turned grim. In such a small village, everyone had to pull their weight. If a hunter was injured, they would struggle to find food, and those left behind would have to stay and defend their homes. Finally, Esta bowed deeply once more, his voice trembling with hope. He said the village would pay whatever they could if Tsukasa would lend them his strength. The thought of villagers fighting monsters without any jobs, like he once had, made Tsukasa feel a pang of sympathy. Still, he had already decided to climb the career ladder in this world, doing whatever would bring him success. Helping them was the obvious choice. When he accepted the request, Esta's eyes welled up as he thanked Tsukasa, his voice trembling with gratitude. Zozo gave him a hearty pat on the shoulder, making Tsukasa blush in embarrassment. He still knew nothing about this world, had no money, no home, so repaying the kindness of those who helped him felt only right. Originally, Tsukasa planned to march straight into the forest and deal with the silver wolf, but before he could take a step, his stomach growled loudly enough to echo. Red-faced, he awkwardly asked if he could perhaps have some food and clothes first. The villagers gladly obliged, serving him a simple meal and giving him light travel clothes, a sturdy cloak, a leather belt with a short dagger, and a pair of tough gloves. Dressed like that, Tsukasa couldn't help but feel as though he were cosplaying an anime adventurer, but he quickly focused his mind and returned to the forest path. As he walked, he noticed countless strange plants he'd never seen before. Curiosity sparked. Maybe some of them could be useful, or even edible. That thought made him check his list of jobs again. Without hesitation, he switched to appraiser. With this job, he could analyze the value and properties of any object, even peek at people's status windows if he wanted. Now, though, he used it to identify herbs. One plant caught his eye, dozal herb, a lily-like flower used in low-grade healing potions. Excited, Tsukasa began collecting a few, already imagining himself switching jobs to alchemist in the future. The thought of crafting potions and making money filled him with new energy. In a world without the internet, this ability felt incredibly useful. He couldn't help but feel grateful. Still, having to switch jobs every time he needed something was inconvenient. In games, when you leveled up, you could often retain your old skills even after changing classes. Maybe it worked the same way here? Curious, he decided to test it. Even though he was currently an appraiser, he tried casting a stone lance spell, one he'd learned as a sorcerer. Pebbles on the ground trembled, gathered, and fused into a sharp, arrow-like spike. It was smaller than usual, but it worked. He launched it at a nearby tree, smiling with satisfaction, until he noticed his mana had dropped by 50 points. The realization hit him hard. Using magic outside its corresponding job drained far more mana. It wasn't efficient, but it was still an important discovery. He could imagine it now, a swordsman who also used magic, or a mage who fought with a blade. It was a powerful combination for surprise attacks, even if it consumed more energy. Of course, that meant he needed to level up fast before it became a problem. Just as he was thinking that, Tsukasa suddenly froze. Something was nearby. A faint, foul scent filled the air, the stench of a predator. Peering through the bushes, he spotted them. Silver wolves. 3 of them, moving cautiously, their silver fur glinting under the filtered light. They were far closer to the village than he had imagined, and definitely not as cute as he had pictured. Their agility was high, but thankfully, his stats were slightly better. He took a slow breath, switching jobs back to sorcerer, and began to concentrate. Stones on the ground vibrated and lifted into the air, shaping into 3 sharp lances. Then, with a flick of his hand, he launched them. The silver wolves never saw it coming. 2 of them collapsed instantly, their skulls shattered. The third howled in pain, one leg mangled, and turned its bloodshot eyes toward him. It bared its fangs and lunged, jaws wide open. Panicked, Tsukasa cast another stone lance spell, his hands trembling. and struck just in time. The lance pierced the creature's skull mid-leap, killing it instantly. For a moment, Tsukasa just stood there, stunned. Then he stepped closer to confirm. It was dead. Completely dead. Suddenly, a faint chime echoed in his ears, like the sound of a phone notification. His status window popped up, showing that his base stats and mana had both increased. He clenched his fist in triumph. He'd leveled up. A grin spread across his face as he looked toward the deeper part of the forest. Somewhere out there, the rest of the pack was gathering, and Tsukasa Amashiki was ready. After all, every monster defeated was one step higher on his career ladder in Isekai. As Tsukasa left the village, he remembered Zozo's message to collect the fang of the silver wolf as proof of his victory. But looking at the creature's massive, terrifying body and its shattered head made him hesitate. Still, after a moment of grim resolve, he managed to pry one of its fangs free. The memory of that murderous aura sent a shiver down his spine. He realized he needed to master the art of job changing as quickly as possible if he wanted to survive in this world. Another thought struck him as well. During his last level up, his stats had only increased in line with his current job, sorcerer. Maybe if he switched to another job, his other attributes would rise too, but he had to confirm that first. Suddenly, a cold chill ran through him. He could sense multiple monsters closing in. From behind the bushes, a whole pack of silver wolves emerged, their eyes gleaming under the dim light. Tsukasa froze in shock, completely unprepared for this. Acting on instinct, he summoned several layers of magic circles before the beasts lunged at him. Dozens of stone lances burst from the ground, 3 times more than before, piercing the air toward the wolves, but his attack only grazed a few of them. The rest charged forward, furious, their movements swift and precise like speeding bullets. Tsukasa trembled. He hadn't realized these monsters could move so fast. They weaved between his spells with terrifying ease. He stumbled backward, panic rising in his chest. There was no way he could win against this many. Yet, by sheer luck, one of his lances struck true, killing a wolf beside him. He felt a fleeting surge of triumph. It must be the result of his growing magic power. But there was no time to celebrate. The rest of the pack was already upon him. Trapped and out of time, Tsukasa made a split-second decision. He activated his job change ability once more, reaching quickly for his dagger. In an instant, his stance shifted. He was now a swordsman. The transformation was immediate. His footing steadied, and his instincts sharpened. Gripping his blade tightly, he prepared to defend his vital points. When the first wolf lunged, Tsukasa slashed forward. Power surged through his arm. Raw, exhilarating strength. Compared to before, the monster's movements now seemed slower, easier to read. He dashed between them, his blade dancing in arcs of silver light. One by one, the wolves fell. Adrenaline flooded his veins as he fought. After a grueling struggle, the last wolf collapsed. A familiar sound echoed in his head. The chime of leveling up. Just as he expected, his strength and agility had skyrocketed thanks to his swordsman job. With this discovery, Tsukasa realized he could now control how his stats developed, depending on which job he chose. It was an incredible breakthrough. He could experiment with this system later, to plan out his growth more strategically. After the fight, Tsukasa wandered the forest for about an hour, but found no more monsters. Deciding not to venture deeper and risk attracting new threats, he focused on what he had gained. He had more than enough fangs, and had taken down a good number of the pack. Satisfied, he began heading back. On his way, he passed the battlefield again, where the bodies of the wolves still lay scattered. He had assumed they'd vanish like in video games, but they didn't. The fur shimmered faintly in the light. Maybe there's something useful there, he thought. With renewed curiosity, he switched to his appraiser job. Information appeared before his eyes. The silver wolf fur were valuable materials for clothing and blankets, and though their meat was tough, it was said to taste delicious. Grinning, Tsukasa couldn't hide his excitement. There was no way he'd waste such valuable resources. Using psychic magic, he lifted the carcasses effortlessly to bring them along. Tsukasa brought everything back to the village. He could have skinned the monsters himself if he switched to the hunter job, but he was far too exhausted to bother. Instead, he decided to leave the work to the villagers. Meanwhile, panic was spreading in the village. One of the men ran frantically to Zozo, shouting that a monster was approaching. Zozo immediately feared the worst. He thought Tsukasa had been killed. The villagers gasped as a massive, white-furred creature emerged from the trees. None of them had ever seen such a monster before, and terror swept through the crowd. But then they noticed something odd. The monster wasn't attacking. It was moving sluggishly, almost floating. Zozo stepped closer, squinting in disbelief. Hidden behind the mountain of fur was Tsukasa, completely drained and staggering under the weight of what he was carrying. It turned out he had bundled all the wolf corpses together with magic. During the journey, the bodies kept floating apart, so he decided to haul them as one giant clump. When he finally reached the village, he dropped the pile with a heavy sigh of relief. Zozo rushed to him, half panicked, demanding to know what on earth he was dragging in. Tsukasa blinked, confused, and explained that these were the silver wolves that had been terrorizing them. The villagers could hardly believe it, especially seeing the carcasses hovering mid-air. Tsukasa realized that magic like this must be rare in their area. Esta ran over, visibly relieved that he was still alive. Tsukasa handed him 11 fangs as proof of the hunt, and added that he had already checked the surrounding area. No monsters remained. Hearing that, the villagers erupted in cheers, shouting and crying in relief. When Tsukasa turned around, he saw their faces, bright with gratitude and joy. For a village without a single trained fighter, his victory meant everything. To him, it was just another day of work and another level gained. But to them, it was salvation. Zozo threw his arms around Tsukasa in excitement, thanking him over and over. Tsukasa awkwardly brushed it off, saying he was just doing his job, but Esta didn't care. He bowed deeply. For them, they owe a life to Tsukasa. The rest of the villagers followed his lead, bowing one after another in silent gratitude. Tsukasa froze. No one had ever shown him that kind of appreciation before. He had only expected payment for his work, nothing more. Back in his old world, when he landed his hard-fought corporate job, people had congratulated him with fake smiles, then whispered behind his back that he was arrogant, that he was just another elite trying to act like a hero. Jealousy and spite were things he'd grown used to. Genuine kindness, however, was something completely foreign. Unable to handle the warmth of it all, Tsukasa quickly changed the subject and asked the men to help skin the wolves. To his surprise, the burly villagers immediately perked up, brandishing their knives with eager grins. Tsukasa told them he only needed the pelts, and offered the meat to the village instead. Esta's eyes sparkled. The villagers rarely had access to fresh meat. Within moments, everyone was bustling with excitement. Huge pots were brought out, fires were lit, and the women and children fetched ingredients and jars of alcohol from their homes. The village came alive with laughter and the aroma of roasted meat. For the first time in a long while, they could feast without fear. From the corner, Tsukasa quietly watched them celebrate, never imagining that his efforts would bring such joy. Feeling both shy and utterly spent, he asked Esta if he could rest in the village for the night. The moment he lay down, exhaustion crashed over him. His body ached, but his heart felt strangely light. His new life in this world had begun, stronger than he'd expected. From now on, this village would be his base of operations, where he'd hunt monsters, level up, and uncover the secrets of this strange world. And with that comforting thought, Tsukasa drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep. When Tsukasa woke up, he was startled. Sunlight was pouring through the window, bright, warm, and far too strong for what he thought should have been nighttime. He remembered dozing off during the village's celebration. A knock on the door cut his thoughts short. It was Esta. The village chief smiled sheepishly, saying he didn't want to wake him in case he was still tired. In his hands, he carried breakfast, a bowl of meat and mushroom soup, a few slices of bread, and a simple salad on the side. The smell alone made Tsukasa's stomach growl. He hadn't eaten anything since noon yesterday. Without hesitation, he scooped up a spoonful of the steaming soup. The taste surprised him, light and creamy, like milk sweetened by vegetables. Carrots and potatoes gave it a satisfying texture, and the meat, he instantly recognized it. Silver wolf, he thought. The flavor was rich, tender like beef, melting in his mouth the more he chewed. The bread looked rough on the outside, but when torn apart, it was soft and airy inside. Tsukasa dipped it into the milky broth, letting it soak before taking a bite. It was simple, hearty, and exactly what he needed. The kind of comfort that felt like a cold beer after a long, exhausting day. When he finished, Tsukasa returned the dishes to the kitchen and bowed politely in thanks. Esta then asked him to sit down for a moment, handing him a small pouch as payment for defeating the silver wolf. Inside were 13 silver coins. Unfortunately, Tsukasa had no idea how much that was worth. Thinking quickly, he pretended to be a mountain dweller unfamiliar with money. Esta laughed and gladly explained. A filling meal like a sandwich would cost a few coins, he said. Not the most helpful explanation, but it was something. After listening carefully, Tsukasa pieced it together with his sharp mind. Iron coins were the smallest, about 10 yen. Copper coins were worth 100, silver 1,000. Then came small gold coins worth 10,000, and large gold coins worth 1,000,000. Altogether, he'd earned about 13,000 yen. The village chief explained that the Adventurers Guild usually paid 1 silver coin per silver wolf, though the rate varied by region. He chose to pay fairly. Cheating an adventurer would only hurt the village's reputation. Tsukasa appreciated that. It was good to know there were standards here. Otherwise, someone could easily take advantage of him. Esta then handed him another small pouch, 50 copper coins for the wolf pelts. Bowing apologetically, he said the usual price was higher, but the village had suffered losses from the attack. Tsukasa didn't mind. Back home, he might have protested over an unfair deal, but this was his first real interaction in another world. He wasn't about to ruin it over money. Then, almost hesitantly, Esta brought up another request. Several villagers were injured during the silver wolf attack, and they needed dozel herbs to make medicine. The name sparked a memory. Tsukasa had identified that plant before. He could have changed his job to priest and healed them himself, but that would have been overkill. Instead, he took out the herbs he'd collected. Esta's face lit up. He praised Tsukasa for gathering useful plants during his hunt, though in truth, Tsukasa had picked them up by chance. The chief led him to the village apothecary. Tsukasa looked surprised to see another job holder in town. Unfortunately, it turned out she wasn't one at all. Esta impatiently knocked on a small wooden door. From inside came the sound of a cane striking the floor, followed by a gruff voice. An old woman opened the door, scowling. She barked that she couldn't make any healing potions without dozel. Tsukasa blinked, caught off guard by the scolding, but Esta quickly stepped in, showing her the herbs he brought. The apothecary, a woman named Gerda, instantly softened and invited them inside. The room was overflowing with hanging herbs, dried leaves, and countless bottles. The air was so thick with mixed scents that Tsukasa's nose could barely keep up. Gerda snatched the herbs impatiently, inspecting them with a sharp eye before nodding in satisfaction, already preparing to work. Curious, Tsukasa hesitated, then asked if it was possible to make medicine without being an apothecary. Gerda shot him a glare and barked. She said, "Anyone can make medicine if they have the knowledge and skill. It's the same as you don't need to be a chef to cook." Her words made perfect sense to him. But then, what was the point of having a job at all? He couldn't help asking. Gerda shrugged. She didn't know much, but she explained that jobs allowed people to gather and mix materials more efficiently, as if their knowledge and instincts were enhanced. Tsukasa nodded thoughtfully. That seemed logical enough. He was about to leave when Gerda suddenly stopped him. She needed an extra pair of hands for brewing. And just like that, Tsukasa found himself trapped in the old woman's workshop, pounding and grinding herbs endlessly with a mortar and pestle. The texture had to be just right, smooth and even, which took forever. It was exhausting work. He was assigned a mountain of tasks, and soon realized that making potions required far more than just dozel plants. At first, Tsukasa only wanted to help to learn how medicine was made, but the process turned out to be far more complicated than he'd imagined. There were too many steps, too many mixtures to remember. Exhausted and bored, he decided to switch jobs under the excuse of trying something new. Before him, a magic circle flared to life. Gerda couldn't see it. She only stared in confusion as Tsukasa's job changed to apothecary. Instantly, knowledge flooded his mind. He could now recognize the properties of each herb, and even knew the exact motion needed to grind them to the right texture. Gerda frowned, puzzled by how suddenly he'd become so capable. When Tsukasa eagerly asked if the next step was drying the herbs, she hesitated, but confirmed it was true. It enhanced the medicine's potency. Tsukasa asked for permission to speed up the drying process. It was one of the new skills he wanted to try. He whispered an incantation, and in seconds, the herbs in his hand dried perfectly. He handed them to Gerda, who squinted suspiciously and asked if he wasn't supposed to be a sorcerer. "No sorcerer," she said, "could use a spell like that." The air grew tense. Tsukasa hesitated, then confessed. He was a job changer. That was how he could do it. Gerda's face hardened. She didn't believe him. Slamming her staff to the ground, she declared that jobs were innate. You couldn't choose them, and you certainly couldn't change them. The revelation shocked Tsukasa, so this world didn't work like a game after all. Gerda went on, explaining that while geniuses might master their jobs and reach the highest level, Changing one's job entirely was impossible. Still, she warned him to be careful with that strange power. Then Gerda smirked. Picking up a bundle of dozal plants, she said an apothecary would be invaluable in wartime. Tsukasa froze. The idea horrified him. Just helping out had already been tough enough, let alone doing more. When she asked what level his new job was, he muttered, "Level 1. Gerda pointed her staff at him. "Then you'd better work harder," she said. The more he studied, the more kinds of medicine he'd be able to make. And hard work, she told him, was the core of every craft. Opening a large storage room, she revealed shelves filled with countless herbs and ingredients, then ordered him to learn everything about them. Tsukasa couldn't refuse. With his arms full of herbs and a sulky frown on his face, he followed her orders. Whether she called herself an apothecary or not, Gerda was definitely a witch. It had been a week since Tsukasa settled in the village. Now, he was out hunting a poor horned rabbit with his trusty bow and arrows. Hunting monsters every day had become his routine, and with each successful hunt, his level steadily rose. Today's prey, the horned rabbits, had tender, juicy meat. As always, Tsukasa shared his catch with the villagers, eating together under the warm evening glow. It all began after one of Gerda's long lessons. A group of village men invited Tsukasa to join their hunt, though they also wanted his advice. Together, they headed into the forest. Zozo, one of the men, mentioned that many of their traps hadn't caught a single animal. Everyone found it strange. The silver wolf pack had vanished long ago, so the forest should have been full of small creatures by now. But Tsukasa, with his hunter's instincts, could feel the tension in the air, the panic of unseen animals and lesser monsters. His job allowed him to read these subtle signs, and soon he figured out what was happening. A new pack was moving into the area. The men were shocked, even a little panicked, but Tsukasa calmly told them that it might take time before any danger arrived. Still, he warned them to avoid certain parts of the forest. Since that day, Tsukasa began helping with the hunts more regularly. His level rose to 8, and his hunter class reached level 5, though progress was starting to slow. His habit of switching jobs and improving his skills made him think about moving on. He worried about what kind of monsters might eventually threaten the village, but after all, he was only a guest there. While he was lost in thought, he noticed a commotion in the village square. Zozo greeted him and explained that the merchants had arrived. People had gathered around wagons unloading all sorts of goods, fabrics, trinkets, shining jewelry. Tsukasa felt a spark of excitement. Merchants were travelers, moving from place to place. Once they finished selling here, they'd move on to the next town. If he joined them, he could finally head toward new lands. It felt like fate. Just as he started thinking of leaving, the opportunity appeared before him. Without hesitation, he ran toward one of the wagons and asked to speak to the leader. Inside, he met a well-dressed middle-aged man named Giselle, who welcomed him warmly. After a long talk, Giselle understood his intentions and mentioned that their caravan was bound for the city of Rassel in 2 days. In exchange for letting Tsukasa travel with them, Giselle asked him to help guard the caravan along the way. Tsukasa was surprised. He hadn't mentioned his job, but perhaps the merchants had learned about him from the villagers, as merchants often do. He agreed to the deal, and they sealed it with a firm handshake. When he stepped out of the wagon, Zozo was waiting nearby. He'd overheard the whole conversation. There was sadness in his eyes, knowing Tsukasa was leaving. In his old world, if someone had asked why he was quitting, Tsukasa would have replied coldly, "There's nothing left for him there." But now, things were different. With a bright smile and new resolve, he told Zozo that he wanted to see the world, to grow stronger. Zozo respected his choice, even if it hurt to say goodbye. Tsukasa then went to the village chief's house to take his leave. He apologized for having to go, despite all the kindness he'd received, but Esta, the old chief, patted him on the shoulder and said they were the ones who should be thankful. The warm smiles of Esta and his wife shone so brightly, Tsukasa almost had to look away. Finally, he visited Grandma Gerda to say goodbye. After all their training together, his apothecary class had become his highest level job. He'd learned so much from her, more than he ever expected. He realized her knowledge rivaled that of true master apothecaries, despite not being a job holder herself. He couldn't imagine how many years she must have studied on her own. Tsukasa deeply respected her. The old woman had given him everything she knew, freely, without hesitation or reward. On the morning of his departure, the entire village came to see Tsukasa off at the gates. He was caught off guard by the crowd, though Giselle didn't seem surprised. After all, Tsukasa had done a lot for them. Voices rose in unison, calling out blessings for his journey, wishing him safety and strength, hoping they would meet again when he had grown even stronger. The warmth of their words settled deep in his chest, stirring something soft and unfamiliar within him. As he walked beside Giselle beyond the gates, Tsukasa knew that staying any longer might dull his senses, something he couldn't allow. He was grateful, though, that this quiet village had been the place where his new journey began. Barely minutes into the road, a sharp grin spread across his face. His instincts flared. The silver wolves had arrived. The other merchants panicked, urging their horses to gallop faster, but Tsukasa had already moved to the open rear of a wagon, calm and focused. He activated his magic circle with practiced ease. Beneath each wolf, the same sigil ignited in a flash, and a heartbeat later, the ground beneath them turned into jagged stone, impaling their bodies. A few wolves managed to dodge, darting through the trees, but Tsukasa was already readying his bow. Balancing on the swaying wagon, he drew his arrow and loosed it in one smooth motion. The shot cut through the wind and struck true, straight through the eye of a leaping wolf. It collapsed instantly. After that, the road fell silent again. The journey grew calm, the air lighter. Tsukasa leaned back, the rush of battle still thrumming in his veins. Ahead lay unknown lands, new monsters, and endless chances to grow stronger. He couldn't wait to see what awaited him next.